anything of importance, we think it's useful to start from the practitioner's perspective. And that's why we find a line from American singer Jessie J very instructive. It's called "Forget About the Price Tag." And that's going to be the base that side proposition will stand for in this debate in allowing free distribution of music on the internet. So what does it mean to allow this? That means we're going to permit anyone, anywhere in the world to share music with the rest of the online community with no more legal penalties. People can choose to pay for music if they want to, but there is no obligation for them to do so. This policy is going to apply worldwide, and we think analogous situations already exist in what happens online. We've seen this with the band Radiohead, with its latest album titled In Rainbows, which it essentially placed upon its website and allowed people online to pay as much or as little as they wanted for the album, even zero in terms of getting access to the album. We think the yardstick for this debate is which side best protects the music industry. No, thank you. And we're going to show that proposition does this best. We're going to acknowledge the existence of the principle of copyright law. But we argue that it's a convenient invention that no longer protects the interests of music providers. We're going to do this in a comprehensive manner through 3 lines of analysis. First, why it's legally justified. Second, no thank you, why it promotes the music industry. And lastly, why it really gives power back to the artists. So let's look first at why it's legally justified. The thrust of our argument is that free distribution of music benefits the music industry in the precise way copyrights were intended to do so, and thus copyrights are legally redundant. We acknowledge the existence of intellectual property law, but let's understand the precise nature of intellectual property rights. When we're talking about a copyright, it's very different from a fundamental right we can have, like the right to life or the right to water, because that enshrines your human dignity. Intellectual property rights instead belong to what are known as instrumental rights, that is to say, rights which are designed as a means to a greater purpose. So essentially, when we're talking about copyrights, they were established because we thought it would protect innovators in a wide range of domains and spur innovation across the economy. We see this in the fact that copyrights, unlike your right to life, for example, no thank you madam, don't exist as long as you're alive, for example, but only for a specified duration. In some jurisdictions, maybe 20 years, some jurisdictions, 50 years. But what's happened following the rise of the internet? We've seen a sea change in the music industry, which means that intellectual property rights don't protect innovation in the music scene anymore. Why is this the case? Now, what happens is that online music distribution networks that we see are virtually impossible to stop. On peer-to-peer distribution networks like Pirate Bay or BitTorrent, what we see is people being allowed to transfer their music discreetly from one network of computers to another. Hold on a moment, sir. And the key point about these networks is that there's no need for a centralized server or group of individuals to coordinate that music distribution. Every time you download music, it means you also facilitate that distribution. How might you stop that?
You say that because Pirate Bay can't be stopped, we don't do anything about it. So because you can't beat them, you join them?
No, we're going to make the argument that what happens now as we try to stop them is we end up hurting ourselves. What happens is we do violence to the very music industry we protect. And that's what I'm going to show you in my point. Exactly now, when I talk about how enforcement of copyright hurts the music industry because of the huge public resentment that it's generated. We've seen this when an American teenager got sued by record labels Warner and EMI for hundreds of thousands of US dollars in a landmark case last year. The public response, a massive boycott against both of these recording labels, resulting in losses in tens of millions of dollars. So you want to stop them, you stop the music industry too. We think the boycott hurts their public image, and it's really bad for a music industry which, like the rest of the media, lives or dies by publicity. No thank you. In fact, we think the boycott also hurts individual bands which are trying to promote music, when Linkin Park concerts were shunned as a consequence of such cases taking place with regard to copyright law in music. Why? Because the bands were seen, no thank you, as stooges of the record labels. By contrast, if we allow the free distribution of music on the internet, we restore the benefits to the music industry of publicity because they're no longer seen as a foe to the rest of society. We achieve the purpose for which copyright law was originally envisioned, and in fact, it affirms the desires of bands like Radiohead, which I already talked about. That's why it's legally justified, because it benefits the music industry and it's what they really want. No thank you. Let's now move to my next argument, where I talk about why it promotes the music industry. And here, our thesis is quite simple. We're going to talk about how it creates benefits in two ways: more publicity and more money. What's the situation now? The music industry is losing gargantuan amounts of money from the sale of compact discs. For instance, in 2010 alone, Deutsche Grammophon and EMI together made losses in excess of $40 million just from the sale of compact discs. Why? Because people are choosing to download music from free online sources. If we allow the free distribution of music, hold on a moment, ma'am, it's going to be good for the music sector, because now that you put up the music online, people can try out the music. This creates greater awareness and greater publicity, which increases attendance at concerts if people like the music, and also merchandise purchases. Why isn't this good?
How is this freely distributing music if it's buying it off the internet? How do you expect the music industry to thrive if music is freely distributed and they don't get any income from it?
The point is, what you're not realizing is just because you may offer something free, it doesn't mean people won't pay for it. If people realize that it takes time and effort to make some music that's really good, as we've seen with Radiohead, they're willing to pay up to $3 to $4 per track voluntarily. We've seen that people are willing to pay and attend concerts once they hear the music first, and that usually occurs online. We've seen that this fits preferences of 80% of American users of the internet code anonymously. This benefits bands like Gorillaz and I Fight Dragons, which existed solely online, but are able to get people to pay and sustain their incomes. We think it's also good for bands which are moving from physical albums to online tracks. We've seen this with Radiohead's latest collection in Rainbows, which earned 10 times the amount that its previous physical album did, because it was placed online free, but people were willing to pay upwards of $5 per track on average. In fact, since it's now legal using an online platform to get music through free distribution, we think it's no longer seen as a black market by record companies. So what happens now is they can also tap on these free distribution platforms to carry out the same kinds of advertising and promotional campaigns that they were previously able to do in the physical world. Previously, they weren't able to do so because they saw it as antithetical to their business model. We're going to show that it wasn't the case. We're going to say that record labels are now able to promote new bands along with established ones, for example, and that's going to be good for the music industry because it means they can finally tap on a platform that for so long has allowed people to enjoy music together. Thus, it's good for the music industry, and thus we would support the free distribution of music online. What has proposition shown in this debate? That the music industry truly benefits, that copyrights are anachronistic in the age of the internet, and that what we really want to hear isn't a cacophony of legal voices drowning themselves out, but what we truly want to hear is the songs, the voices, and the lyrics of people who are interested and people who really do want to make music.
And now to open the case for the opposition, I call upon Leandro Solis.
Mr. Speaker and members of this House, would you ever rob a bank? Would you ever rob a record store? Would you ever rob the same music that you can find in these record stores? And that is what we're asking then, the government side. Because what we essentially see is the issue of this debate is whether or not it's the same thing to steal directly from the profits that the artists and the music industry deserve by stealing their music online. We on the opposition side believe that this is essentially the reason why the music industry is under existential threat. Why record studios like Sony, BMG, EMI, and Virgin are currently experiencing quarterly losses that are threatening both their business and their art. And why we believe that robbing a record store is the same thing as robbing a record. We on the opposition side support the legal sale of music. We don't support the theft of this music. We support the health of the record industry, but we don't support the infringement of these copyrights or the obliteration of this industry, from which so many people stake their lives and their livelihoods. I'll take that in a minute, sir. And we also support a person's right to distribute their music if it is free, if they give their own permission to do so, but not if it is against their will. And on their Radiohead point, which they mentioned time and time again throughout their case, we'll elaborate on this more later on. But before I move on.
In the status quo, record companies already make almost all their money from concerts and selling other related paraphernalia. Why won't you let them distribute their records freely? Because this helps concert sales and paraphernalia sales.
I have two responses to this. Firstly, just because they have an alternative source of income doesn't mean that you're stealing this source of income is right. Because if they wanted to give this industry music away for free, then they would. Like in Radiohead's case, but in almost every other case, they do not. This is theft. Secondly, this only applies to groups like Radiohead that are already established. What about indie music groups? What about these groups that don't have their names already established? These people will not be able to go on tour, like the Warped Tour that makes millions of dollars every year. These people don't have the resources for that. No, thank you, sir. So what we're saying is that we should crack down on piracy. We're going to shut down places like LimeWire and torrent groups like Pirate Bay, which has recently already suffered much pressure from international anti-piracy groups. We're going to shut down the very groups that profit from the creations of other groups through piracy, especially in the third world. Because it's in these countries where piracy is prevalent that we see that these record companies are losing the most money. Because we wouldn't rob a record store, neither would we rob these records. So first, some rebuttals. The difference with their Radiohead case study and almost every other case was that Radiohead was already established, and Tom York, its lead singer, saw it fit then that they give away the right to reproduce this music freely on the internet because they just wanted to try something different. It was a novel concept. But this doesn't work for independent bands, especially that have not yet established their that have not yet established their reputation. And neither then is it required of them if they didn't choose to give away their right to consume this in the first place. For bands that don't put their music for free on the internet willfully, this is wrong. The first argument was that this was legally justified. They stated that for the same reasons that copyright is in place, they believe that free distribution actually helps these very producers. Well, we tell you that the difference is that LimeWire, though it distributes the music, does not benefit the artists themselves. We support iTunes, a medium of the same internet that makes people earn from the internet and not have their profits stolen from them. We say this does not protect people and enforcement of copyright does not hurt public image as much as the loss of this band's future record sales does. Secondly, they've stated that this supports the music industry because it puts more music in the hands of people. But this is not substantiated by the greater losses experienced by these bands and record groups. So my first argument for today is that this infringes on intellectual property rights. My second argument is that this is an existential threat to the music industry. And my deputy speaker will be talking about why the government should allow individuals to pursue their musical passion.
Point of information,
Before I move on.
Record companies are making losses from producing CDs. We stop them from producing CDs. We help them stop a policy that has been bleeding profits from them.
We aren't Luddites, ladies and gentlemen. We believe in the internet as a source of making money through iTunes, not piracy, LimeWire, or the Pirate Bay. So moving on to the first argument. What is an intellectual property right? It is the right to own your idea and reproduce it if you give them permission, like in Radiohead's case. But in all these cases we're discussing in the issue of this debate, they don't have permission to reproduce it. And this is important because there's a remuneration for all the work you put into the creation of this music. It's giving people what they deserve from their blood, their sweat, and their tears. It's unfair for the musician then, who's worked long nights to produce this music, to have someone just copy-paste in their Nero CD burner the song that they've created so you can share it with all your friends. So it's the state's responsibility, no thank you sir, to protect these property rights under the social contract, because you give up some of your rights in order to have the security of yourself and the security of your creations. That's why we create an environment where people can share their art, where innovation is rewarded so that they can make more innovation. And this is completely analogous to other cases of copyrights that we haven't examined on their side of the case. We don't support the proliferation of fake iPods and PlayStations across the streets of Southeast Asia. We don't support the proliferation of the brand of Lacoste. in the name low cost. Because piracy is something we don't endorse. And when you come up with an idea, you have ownership of it.
So,
You have free distribution is the robbery of this from the creator. All their effort is in vain, and what you're doing then is theft. So this moves us then to the second argument of the existential threat this poses to the music industry, from top to bottom. Because music is not just about ideas. It's a business that has to be sustained by profits and operational costs, through the production facilities, the singers' fees, the distribution, and the marketing. But what happens when music is distributed freely? They can't make any more music because, as we're seeing today, the same record companies they discussed are losing money quarterly because they aren't making the same record sales. But what they're saying is that maybe they can make up for that through concert tours. But what about then all the independent groups that have not established international audiences and will not be able to pay the millions of dollars required for these operations? So this leads us to the question that who suffers from this? It's not just the CEOs at the top of Sony, EMI, and Virgin Records. It's also the people at the bottom, the artists, the technicians, and everyone in the corporate offices. So, considering that a musician's life is hard enough, why would we make it even harder? Why would we eliminate whatever prospect of making it big and making the fame and fortune that is the reason for which many people enter this industry, making the industry suffer both creatively and in terms of its business side? Because that's what we on the opposition stand for, both the rights of the musician and the health of the music industry. We are also against the idea of theft, both of physical goods, like our CD in a record store, and its property rights, however abstract that may be. Which is why we would not rob a record store, and we would definitely not rob a record. We hereby oppose this proposition. Thank you.
I thank the first opposition speaker for his speech. And now to continue the case of the proposition, I call upon Ashik Shami Kumar.
You know what, guys? I've got a confession to make. I have a torrent program on my computer. And I think this is a confession that maybe many of us in the room have to make as well. What side proposition is telling you is, stop hiding and come out of the shadows because you've been doing something right all along. I have 3 points of contention. Firstly, is our policy principally justified? Are copyrights really fundamental rights? Secondly, do we really see a policy on their side of the house which can ever be enforced? Because their policy is crucially hinged on the fact that they can crank down on all this illegal activity. I'm going to tell you that they cannot. Last of all, does our policy reduce profit for the music industry? We say, no it doesn't. So firstly, is it principally okay, our policy? They first say it is a fundamental right, ignoring Ben's analysis that if this really is such an important right, why does it run out after 20 years? Or 50 years? In what other case do we call something a fundamental right and then put a time limit on when it becomes relevant to you? It is not a fundamental right because, as Ben explained and as they ignored, it is an instrumental right. We give you rights over your property because these help another end. These allow you to dignify your life. We wouldn't allow someone to steal your car from you because that would clearly be very harmful to you and your ability to move around freely. However, we think the difference, we think when a person takes a piece of music off the internet freely, that actually benefits the artist. Because when this person who might not have bought the record or the album now listens to it freely and thinks, well, now I like the band, I might go for the concert, that in fact benefits the band. So we think from an instrumental perspective, we are perfectly justified, no thank you, in curbing this right. We tell you it's perfectly justified. That's what we're going to prove. Secondly, can they enforce their policy? And this is where they try to elide over the vast difficulties involved with trying to crack down on the currently illegal activities that we want to make legal. Benjamin told you that torrent files, no, I'll take in a moment, sir, actually, cannot be stopped because they're distributed from individual computers to other individual computers. Any individual's computer anywhere in the world could be a source of this, and it is impossible to police something that is so vast in nature. Yes?
Torrent Spy was closed down. ISO Hunt was closed down. I download music illegally, and last month Pirate Bay was closed down for a week. This works. You won't need to give it a try.
Yeah, it was closed down for a week and then popped up again, exactly like what happened to ISO Hunt. Because the people who set up these websites aren't silly. They have many, many backups. Besides, for any 2 websites you take down, another 5 or 6 spawn. Because the demand for these sort of torrent sites is so large that there's no way to stop them from proliferating. Besides, we tell you that the technology involved in the creation of such torrenting websites is progressing a lot faster than our abilities to police them. The last time I downloaded an illegal, by the way, update onto my computer, it asked me if I wanted to hide my IP address. Guess what I did, guys? It doesn't take much logic to figure out. So we tell you, it's very, very hard to police. And there's no way, no thank you, sir, you are ever going to be able to stop this from happening. So all you're doing in your policy is to prevent people who would have otherwise have heard these songs and from gone to those concerts from doing this. You harm the artist through your own policy. Last point, therefore, does this really reduce profit? Firstly, we say the fact these companies are making massive losses from record sales anyway, and these are not made up for by online sales from places like iTunes, because Apple vastly monopolizes such services and sucks up almost all the profit that record companies try to make. No thank you, ma'am. So we tell you, that's not a good enough excuse. The reason they are losing money is because the people in charge of such record companies have yet to recognize that publicity today happens online. That the people who attend concert sales, as Benjamin told you, are people who have listened to these records and think maybe this band is someone whose concerts I should go to and I should support financially in other ways. We give you the example, no thank you, of what Radiohead did. And they said, oh, that's because Radiohead is well established. But the reason why it managed to make so much money nonetheless, over and above its previous albums, was precisely because of the fact that it made it available to a much wider audience when they made it completely free. You can't explain the 10-time increase from the previous album just by saying they were well established. Let me move on now, no thank you, to my point of substantive. Now that I've shown you that we do protect profits and we do protect the industry, to my point of substantive, well, why is it that our policy is one which gives power back to artists and allows them to use a creative license in the original way they were meant to? And along the way, I'll be showing why our policy is very beneficial as well. My first level of analysis is that our policy increases the creative latitude that artists have. Because when you make it illegal to freely distribute music online, then the only available legal options for an artist to distribute music is through a record company. The problem is that in the status quo, under their policy, record companies have a creative stranglehold on what many bands do, because they're the band's currently only available option of distributing their music. What are the kind of things that these record companies do? When they see music that is experimental, I'll take you in a moment. When they see music that is new and fresh and daring, it is often taken wholesale out of CDs or otherwise censored and restricted. We think this is very harmful to the artist because it prevents them from being able to use their creative license as they should. Yes?
How does your policy actually create more profit when in status quo it clearly is not happening with the proliferation of piracy?
No, but piracy is not the problem that is creating the loss of profit. The loss of profit is the fact they don't realize they have to stop wasting money producing records and let free distribution online create a sort of massive profits that lead to them benefiting from vastly improved attendance at concerts. So no, that logic simply does not hold. Let me move back to my point of substantive. We think this is incredibly damaging for many bands. We pointed to the fact that bands like Archive, for instance, in Europe have had massive problems with their record companies and have been complaining that they can't put out the records they want to let the world hear precisely because of the policy that opposition wants to support. We see bands like Eminem saying about their album Relapse, that we only support 40% of the music on this because the other 60% was trash our record company made us put on. we think this is bad for individual artists. We want to remove this stranglehold by giving them another option of distributing this freely online, so that the people in the world can now listen to all the new and interesting music they otherwise would never have had access to. And then people can come to the concerts and say, I want to hear something fresh. No thank you, both of you. Let me move then to my second level of analysis. Why this helps budding bands and musicians. And this directly clashes with what they said, by the way, about budding bands and musicians. They like to tell us that the reason why they aren't successful is because of our policy. Wait a minute, that's not true. The reason why many big recording companies refuse to take up these bands in the first place is because they think they're too avant-garde, for instance, or that they are too experimental. A very good example of such a band is the band Dubstep. What we do is that when we allow such bands to freely distribute music online, then they gain the kind of mass following that's necessary for them to enter the mainstream. So that answers all the concerns they had about small bands which need to enter the mainstream. Their policy prevents bands from doing this policy, right? Because even if they say that we allow bands to put it free online, they are going to prevent individual people from distributing it to each other, which is the way in which the multiplier effect occurs and the way in which it reaches a much more vast audience than it otherwise would have had. And this increases, once again, attendance at concerts, which are the main form in which they make profits, and it prevents companies from wasting money on silly, outdated ventures like trying to produce records. What have I shown you? Guys, you've always been doing something right. Stand for your own rights, stand for the right of the artist, and stand beside proposition.
The second proposition speaker for this speech. And now to continue the case for the opposition, I call upon Mariela Antoinette Salazar.
Just because it's difficult to implement this policy doesn't mean we shouldn't implement it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't protect intellectual property rights. Now, before I move on to my arguments, I will rebut certain points by the Deputy Prime Minister. Now, he says that in our model, we actually are posing a detriment to record companies because they lose money and they don't earn any profit. But because of the existence of CDs. But ladies and gentlemen, there is iTunes. People can sell their products through iTunes for free. We are for selling their products for free. We are for these artists distributing music for free. But what we are not for is for third parties such as LimeWire, such as FrostWire, Pirate Bay, or ISOHunt distributing the music of these artists for free and disrespecting their intellectual property rights and infringing on these rights that we have previously said are so valuable. Next, he said that if they have music offered free on the internet, then people would have more access to that internet, more access to that music, and essentially they would be able to go to concerts, and international concerts would be more profitable. But ladies and gentlemen, this just proves our point on how, please sit down, indie bands or indie music will have a difficulty in thriving, because if they conceded themselves that the only source of income is international tours, indie bands would have difficulty having international tours because, as we know, these are independent bands that don't have the capability as it is to be able to tour internationally. But before I move on, yes.
If your site supports artists distributing their music for free, why are you so opposed to the websites that allow them to do that?
Thank you for that point, sir, because we say that if artists distribute their music for free, then it is their right because they make that choice themselves. But when it is a third party that distributes their music for free, that is not the choice of these artists, that is not the choice of these record companies, because these third parties often don't even ask permission from these artists and from these record companies, and they don't get paid any royalties for this. Next, they say that anyway, their model, this increases profit. Well, we say that this is a shaft within their case because the Prime Minister himself conceded that in status quo, these companies are losing money and artists are losing money. Now the Deputy Prime Minister, please sit down, tells us all of a sudden that this will increase profit. Ladies and gentlemen, if piracy is causing people to lose money in status quo, how on earth will their models suddenly increase profit if they're forwarding piracy even more?
Point of information, ma'am.
Please sit down. Next into his argument on how censorship will happen and how all of a sudden the artists will have difficulty distributing their source of music because of censorship. Ladies and gentlemen, we said again and again that we're for these artists distributing their music whichever they want to. What we're not for is for third parties to distribute their music without the artist's permission. Next is their point on whether or not there is a value to intellectual property. Please sit down. We say yes, there is a value for intellectual property, and our leader of opposition has stated this. It is an extension to the right of property, an idea, a created common, and an artistic pursuit, which is your own. And as my Prime Minister already established, this should be respected as a right of property. Please sit down. They tell us that free distribution is impossible to stop. Ladies and gentlemen, just because it's difficult to stop doesn't mean we should stop it. Now, going on to my argument on how this allows the government to protect liberty and the pursuit of happiness by allowing their citizens to pursue their musical passion. But before I move on, yes.
If you think that file sharing websites do help artists, why do you want to sue them?
Thank you for that point, sir. We never said that file sharing sites help artists. What we're saying is that sites such as iTunes, where artists themselves post these music and where record companies themselves post these music, actually help them to distribute music internationally. What we're not for is for third-party sites such as Isohon or Crosswire or LimeWire, where these artists have no ownership towards these websites, and these websites merely take their music away. But yes, going to my argument. In the 20th century, musicians were treated with the utmost importance. They profited from what we call fame, glory, and money. Essentially, they were living the dream. Singers such as Edith Piaf, more obviously the Beatles, earned millions of dollars from their albums. But since piracy thrived in the 90s, recording artists began to suffer and no longer earn the same amount of money they used to. As a consequence, many people who want to pursue their dream of becoming musicians, many people who want to live their dream are forced to give it up, are forced to let go of their dream. Please sit down. Why? Because even if they want to pursue their dreams, even if they want to become musicians, even if they love music so much, ladies and gentlemen, the result is a bad romance. Why? Because when music is distributed freely without the artist's consent, then they earn nothing from it. And evidently, that makes it difficult for them to decide to become musicians. Because in the real world, as stated by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, please sit down, in order to reach the top of that pyramid of self-actualization and having the ability to express your ideas freely and share your music, they need the most basic needs, which are food, clothing, and shelter. How can they do so if there's no money in the music industry? For instance, Mandisa, please sit down, an African-American singer, had to give up her dream because there was no longer any money left in the music industry. Now, it's very difficult as it is to make money in the music industry, as conceded by the government side themselves. But this policy that they were proposing makes it even more difficult for these musicians to thrive in the music industry. When your chance of becoming a musician is taken away, then you cannot pursue your passion, and it becomes very difficult to pursue your passion. Now, why is it the government's duty to prevent this policy from happening? Because the government, please sit down, should always protect the interests of their citizens and enable their citizens to freely pursue what makes them happy. Furthermore, the government has a responsibility to uphold culture and allow culture to flourish. And in this context, music should be propagated and allowed to flourish as a part of their culture. Even if in certain instances, people do decide to become musicians and do decide to pursue their passions, it becomes exceedingly difficult for them to do so, and many of them end up becoming unemployed. That's why we see many musicians begging in the street in countries such as France, in England, and even in the United States, for instance, in the subways in New York, because they have difficulty thriving in the music industry. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what we want to do here in the opposition side is to turn this bad romance and love for music into one that benefits the musicians, the music industry, and society as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, you wouldn't steal from a record store, you wouldn't steal a record, and you wouldn't steal someone's idea. Thank you.
Now to continue the case for the proposition, I call upon Theo Renji.
Guys, let me tell you why I hate Fridays. It all started with a simple YouTube link my friend sent me. It said, check out this girl, she's pretty good. 5 repeats of the song later, and Friday, 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 running through my skull. I've never been able to look at Friday in the same way again. Rebecca Black and Justin Bieber are perfect examples of how free music has changed this world. Contrary to side opposition's arguments about how artists will starve as a result of their music being distributed for free, every day we see new stars being created because of the wonders that is free music. So because it isn't stealing if you benefit the person you take from, we say it's okay to distribute music free online. I've got 3 points of contention today. First, is our policy principally justified? Yes, it is. Second, does our policy benefit artists? Yes, it does. Finally, on this point, does our policy benefit the record industry? We tell you it does as well. So let's go on to my first point. Is our side's policy principally justified? Right from the beginning of the debate, we've said our side's policy is principally justified if we can prove that distributing music free online benefits artists and benefits the record label. We've heard no response from that side of the house. We take it to mean that they accept our principal justification that the right to copyright is an instrumental right, not a fundamental right. No, thank you, sir. So then let's go on to my next point of contention, now that we've got that all settled. So the key to this debate is which side of the house best benefits artists and record industries. Next, on artists, let's give you an analogy to clarify what my team has been saying all along, because we still don't think that side of the house really understands it. Tracks and CD-ROMs are like leaflets. That's what the artist is doing. He's giving you music in order for you to listen to it and attend their concerts. It's from the concerts and the merchandise that people buy that artists make money. From the beginning of this debate, from Benjamin's speech, sustained in Ashish's speech, what we've been telling you is that giving people music free is like giving out leaflets free. It encourages publicity for the artist and then helps them make money from the concerts that they attend. So side opposition had a few answers to this. The first thing they said was, well, this doesn't really work for independent bands. But then Ashish came back and said, precisely, this is why we need free music. Because independent bands can't get a major record holder to subscribe to them because they're too avant-garde. No, thank you, sir. So we need things like YouTube, like LimeWire, like ISOHunt, to distribute the artist's music to everyone until they become a popular, accepted part of the mainstream. Then, record industries, record labels will be able to take indie bands on. The internet and free distribution of music is a great thing for independent bands. No, thank you. This is what my second speaker said. I'm saying it again. We don't think they've given us a clear answer on this point. The next argument was rather strange. They basically said, then we'll use iTunes instead, and iTunes somehow solves all the problems. Really, guys? Are you really going to pay for money for a track on iTunes when you could download it from ISOHunt or LimeWire? iTunes doesn't bring artists that much money because firstly, people would rather get it for free, and secondly, iTunes shaves off huge amounts of profit on top of whatever sales they make because they have a monopoly over the industry. So what we've said from the start of this debate is, guys, recognize that this is happening in the status quo. Recognize that we can't stop it. And instead of incurring horrible publicity by shutting down the sites we know and love so much, by suing random innocent people who have just downloaded the music for free, like all their friends, give in and go with the flow. Because that's how we are going to get more people to attend our concerts and maintain the good image of the music industry, a point they failed to rebut. Go on, sir.
And yet, iTunes sales have increased year in, year out. If this model is strengthened, it can work, and so can piracy be destroyed.
We don't think iTunes sales have increased, and even if they have, you still haven't rebutted my point about how iTunes is a monopoly and shaves off profit from the artists you care so much about. If you had listened to my second speaker's speech, he came up and told you why we're actually giving power back to the artists. Because now they're no longer dependent on iTunes, now they're no longer dependent on record labels. They can distribute their music and gain publicity themselves. So if you really cared about the artists, and not just about iTunes, and not just about the big media labels, you would go with our side of the house. But let's take this one step further. We heard something really disturbing in the second speaker when she came up and said they actually supported artists giving music for free. We think this seems to signify a concession that it's actually a good thing for artists to give away their music for free. The only problem they had was that, it should be up to the artists to decide whether they want to do it or not. Guys, in the business world, sometimes we need regulation. If we let the banking industry do exactly what it wants, we would get another financial meltdown like the one we saw in 2008. Sometimes the government has to come in and say, we know what's good for you because you're blinded by the way things have always worked, you're blinded by your own profit motives, and it's good for artists to distribute their music free. We need the government to step in and tell everyone it's okay for you to distribute music free. But let's take this even further, because it leads us to a very dangerous principle. If they really think that artists do benefit from the distributing of their media free, why on earth are they suing the websites that help them do it? Basically, they're suing ISOHunt and BitTorrent and LimeWire, fining them and putting people into jail because they've been responsible for putting seats into concerts, for bringing people to watch thousands of artists worldwide. They always tell us this is stealing someone's idea. No, it's not. It's like taking a leaflet. It's giving them publicity because the more people that hear your music means more people attend your concerts. And in any case, guys, if you're really concerned about the artists, support concerts. CD sales and iTunes sales hardly ever get back to the artist because record companies shave off tons on top, even above and above the amount iTunes has shaved off. So if you care about artists, support free music. Let's go on to my next point, on why we benefit the record industry. Because I think throughout the entire case, they failed to talk even once about the record industry, only focusing on why this benefits artists. On the other hand, on our side of the house, from our first speaker and in our second speaker's point, we told you why this would revitalize the dying record industry right now. Basically what they said was this strange point, like, the record industry is losing money, so if we make them everything free and legal, somehow the record industry would lose even more money. We don't think so. We think when we make the distributing of music free and legal, the record industry is forced to change away from the broken business model of selling CD-ROMs. Fundamentally, this means they get more profits. But let's further break this analysis, because they conceded to us that they couldn't do anything to enforce this policy in the first place. So even if we accepted all their points about how this is bad for the record industry, if you wait a while, sir, it's equally bad on both sides of the house. Go on, sir.
Just because everybody is doing it doesn't make it just.
Yes, but it's going to damage the record industry. And as we pointed out to you earlier, from our very first speaker onwards, the only reason copyright exists is to benefit the record industry and the artists. So if it doesn't benefit them, it shouldn't exist. It may not be just as you see it, but it benefits people. That's the reason why the right exists. If it doesn't benefit them, that right should be taken away. So let's go back to our point. They fail to point out how their policy can be enforced in the first place, so it's equally as bad on both sides of the house. But their side makes the crucial problem of giving record companies a really bad image by shutting down all these sites. We said this in Benjamin's speech already, and we tell you this is the added problem when it was their side of the house because they would actively sue at file sharing sites, giving bad publicity to the record industry that damages sales. So the problem is exactly the same on both sides of the house. If we accept there is a problem, their side of the house adds the added burden of bad publicity on record industries. We tell you, we can't stand for this. So because our side is principally justified, because artists benefit and record industry does too, go with our side of the house.
Everybody in this room, we want good music. Matter of fact, we want to hear the great melodies from these musicians. More importantly, we want to continue to hear good music. We want to allow music to thrive, and the best way to do so is to allow these musicians to make money and you continue to make more music. This step cannot be allowed to be proliferated and be legitimized. Physical and conceptual theft is the same thing. We have cracked down on pirates. We have stopped them from happening time and time again. And if they keep on popping up, we'll keep on pulling them down. Because we can fight the good fight. We will not allow minors to drink, even if all the minors are drinking. We tell you that we need to fight for what is just. Just because society is doing so doesn't mean that we should allow society to do whatever they want. The government knows what's best for the people. They are the parental unit to society at the end of the day, which is something they have not even countered throughout their entire bench. And we tell you that in our model, we will not rob a record store, and yet we will not rob records in our policy and in our model. On that note, we actually have two contentions in this debate. One of which is which best helps the music industry, please sit down, sir. And two, is there actually a value in intellectual property rights? But on the first issue, there have actually been three subclashes. First of all, what can help reach a vast audience? Two, what is actually the reason for the loss of profits within the industry? And three, on which can better help the indie bands? Now, on the first issue, they tell us that, well, in our model, kids will get sued, and these companies will lose publicity. Well, first of all, I like to question the extent of this boycott. I still think Rihanna is still making money and going to concerts. And two, we don't care if people don't... Please sit down, sir. We don't care if people don't like exactly what we're doing, because, quite frankly, what is just is what is just. We cannot lose our principles at the end of the day. Two, we tell you, we concede to the idea that the internet is a great platform for spreading information. But the question is, why can't people pay for this information? Please sit down, sir. Tell you that if they hear a song on the radio or they hear a song in the TV movie preview, they can go to iTunes and pay for that song. So therefore, in our model, if we allow this to happen, the artist can still make a profit while still allowing this music to reach a vast audience per se. Because in our model, I don't think Rihanna did not start out as a megastar today. Please sit down, sir. Matter of fact, Rihanna actually had to undergo some process through marketing. Marketing which requires some level of money, some capital. What happens
information, sir.
Please sit down, sir. What happens is that when you have this capital for marketing, you're able to reach that vast audience. Once you're able to market that vast audience, they will pay for your music on iTunes. We can see internet is the best place to hold selling of these music. But before I move on, fine.
Your second speaker said the music industry was making catastrophic losses. Now you're telling us that Rihanna is making money. What does your side really stand for?
This is actually my second clash, because your whole idea of music industry failing is just because of CDs. So technically, if we just remove the CDs and sold everything on iTunes, we can technically bypass your model and have the intellectual property rights. We sit down, and we can still make the same amount of money, reach the same amount of audience, and have the same amount of music at the same time. So in our model, well, the trickling down effect of the music industry is not going to happen. technicians and the CEOs won't be losing money. Why? Because we're able to have a continuing cycle where money gets in and out of the business. Why? Because you're able to reach it. You find a new artist, you market that new artist. People find out about new artists. People buy it from iTunes. That's why in our model we allow people to sell the music when they want to, and we allow them to give the music for free when they want to. Which is why their entire example of their band rather is that it doesn't actually count in this debate. It's not analogous. Why? Because they give it for free. They gave their consent. We're allowing that to happen in our model. Please sit down, sir. But I tell you that that example is flawed because why? The download numbers are inflated. How are they inflated? Well, of course they're going to have more downloads. Why? Because people aren't going to be pirating from them, so they don't need to download from other sources. That's why their statistics are slightly flawed in their model, and it's vastly inflated. So we tell you then, but then they tell us, well, in our model, even if there are CDs, they can make more
information.
Sit down, sir. They can make more money through concerts, through advertisements. Okay, so assuming that everyone is a Rihanna, they can't do that. What happens about the indie bands, which is the third clash? They can't always go on world tours to make up for losses when it comes to CDs. They can't always go through the advertisement and market off their identity and appearance. It's simply not analogous in this debate. In our model, we allow them to better help the indie bands. Please sit down, sir. How? Tell you that not necessarily all indie bands are avant-garde, which is why we have Arcade Fire who actually won a Grammy. Tell you that indie bands who are marketable can win and can succeed, and they can reach that sort of entertainment, and they can be marketed, which is obviously clear and
Point of information, sir.
But before I move on, sure.
If I do not know what a piece of music sounds like, why would I ever pay money for it? You need free distribution.
I agree. If you don't know what it sounds like, you probably won't buy it. But if you hear it on the radio, you hear it on TV, if you hear it through advertisements, you'll probably want to buy it because it sounds good, right? So in our model, that still exists. You're still able to hear the music for free. You're still able to get that preview, that sneak peek, and you're still able to buy it on iTunes for 99 cents. That's fair enough.
Point of information, sir.
Please sit down, sir. So let me move on the last clash. Now we're better able to help indie bands. Because in our model, now these record companies have the capital and the money to actually market their bands. In their model, it simply does not exist because they don't have enough money. They're already losing money right now. How are they going to gain money by allowing piracy to proliferate? Please sit down, sir. So in our model, we're able to allow indie bands to get that marketing, that extra touch, the extra push, that extra tug to become worldwide sensations. As seen time and time again through particularly Arcade Fire, who was a relatively unknown band before the Grammys. But when they won, clearly their record label was able to gain lots of profits, and they're able to gain profits both through CDs and through the internet. Please sit down, sir. Let's move on to my last issue, whether there's an actual value of intellectual property rights. Because they tell us that, well, rights aren't worth it if everybody's breaking them. Meaning, if we can't beat them, join them. And two, since this right runs out, it's useless. Therefore, it's not absolute. We can see to the fact, not all rights are absolute. We can curtail certain rights when they're bad for the people. But we tell you that this is important because intellectual property rights, property is an extension of tangible property. That is the principle we've been pushing at the end of the day. It is a legitimate extension of this principle. Please sit down, sir. So we tell you that, well, because you thought of your idea, you took the time to innovate, you took the time to make your music, go to the studio, spend your time, therefore you should be able to reap the rewards for your efforts.
Point of information.
It's unfair that we should take away one point of avenue for profit, please sit down, sir, just because, well, you can gain it somewhere else. We've already proven to you that cannot happen in the status quo. So that's why we're telling you that in our model, it will, even if it runs out, which does not happen, because the Beatles and their families are still getting royalties whenever one of their songs gets sold on iTunes, Mr. Chair. We tell you that in our model, it's better because we can help we prove to you that intellectual property rights are tangible rights, they are extensions, and they are legitimate things that the government should protect. Now we're on to the second clash. Because if we can't beat them, join them. Because, well, if everyone's downloading torrents, then matter of fact, they're not important anymore, why should we have this law in the first place? Well, quite frankly, just because everyone is doing it does not make it just, which is my POI. Secondly, we tell you that there is a fight that we can win. If we can crack down on Pirate Bay for several days, what if technology gets better? We can crack down for several months, then for several years. Tell that this is the fight that's worth fighting for, the fight that has enough resources. The United States is fighting this very well. They can do it, they can help, and they can stop this problem. If you side with side opposition, we don't want to rob a record store, and we don't want to rob these people of their records. Thank you.
timekeeper will signal once to let the speaker know you have 1 minute left. After 4 minutes, the timekeeper will signal twice. To deliver the opposition's reply speech, I call upon Mariella Antoinette herself.
The government side doesn't seem to understand the issue in this debate. It's not whether or not artists should freely distribute their music online, because that's them practicing their intellectual property right. What we're against is third parties posting their music online and giving away their music without these artists' consent. We're for bands like Radiohead, for instance, that post their music online and distribute the music of their own will. Not websites such as IsoHunt or Pirate Bay distributing music for them on their own. They remain unresponsive to the fact that putting music online by yourself is giving up your right freely, and how on the other hand, what you're doing is, on their side, is someone taking away that right from you, and someone posting your music without your consent. Now, the reason why we here on the opposition side have been supporting sites such as iTunes so long as the artists distribute the music for free is because that in these avenues, artists exercise the right and make the choice themselves, and pirates don't make that choice for them. They say that iTunes and CDs are non-profitable, but we prove to you that the reason for this is not because they don't work, but it's because of piracy, and it's because of these other websites distributing music online freely without these artists' consent. How on earth can record companies make money from LimeWire? How on earth can record companies make money from iTunes or IsoHunt? Is there a button on LimeWire that says buy? Is there an advertisement that somehow gets sent or paid to record companies? Do record companies make money off them? We say no. And if you hurt the record companies, and if you hurt the music industry, what you're doing essentially, as we've been telling you from the leader of opposition, is that you are hurting the artists themselves. Because as the leader of opposition himself said, we need money in order to market these artists. We need money in order for these artists to become international. We need money in order for these artists to be famous and to gain the money, fame, and glory that they dream of. How can they gain this money if record companies aren't able to thrive? How can they gain these monies if the marketers or the advertisers find it difficult because the record companies are becoming bankrupt and are shutting down because they cannot pay for the Creative Commons, or rather, apologies, they cannot pay because of piracy existing within society nowadays. Now, they tell us that iTunes is not profitable, but we here told you that iTunes sales are increasing. Next, they say that there's no way to clamp down on piracy, but we've told you that piracy is being clamped down on. LimeWire and FrostWire have been closed for months now. IsoHunt and Torrent Spy have been closed down by governments all over the world. And countries such as Malaysia ban downloading off websites by IP addresses and such things. Next, they tell us that indie bands are not making money. Therefore, they need to distribute music freely, and we need these sites such as IsoHunt and Pirate Bay for them to distribute music freely. The fact is that these indie bands need a recording studio for them to become marketable. They need a recording studio for them to become international. And in our globalized world today, they need to distribute their music freely. And for that to happen, they need the help of experts. They need the help of the recording industry. They need the help of these record companies, these artists and repertoires to succeed. And therefore, we beg to oppose. Thank you.
conclude the case for the proposition and the debate as a whole, I call upon Benjamin Berkshire and Hakeem Whitmore.
I don't often walk into a record store, but when I do, I've got a decision to make, whether I want to buy one track or the other. Would you want to choose today the opposition's track, which has proven thus far insincere and inattentive to the interests of the artist or the recording industry? Or do we want to hear a track which recognizes the problems of today, is willing to talk about them, and is willing to commit to changing them? That's the track we've shown throughout this debate, and we're going to demonstrate why this is true through two questions. First, which side has the stance on legal validity confirmed? Second, which side best safeguards the music industry and its artists? So let's look first at legal validity. And what do we hear coming up with side opposition? We heard, first of all, a torrent of complaints about how we were essentially supporting theft. They gave a whole stack of analogies, but by the end, their third speaker was merely saying, this is a legitimate extension of property, I quote. We never saw any logical justification for why this was true, and we never saw an attempt to engage with our argument that what copyright law essentially does at the moment is perpetuate theft of profit from an entire music industry at the moment. That was the crux of the case we presented on side proposition adequately. Next, they talked about how it was good for artists to distribute music free by choice. But they were going to stand in opposition to all websites where this occurs, apart from iTunes, which they constantly extolled as this cure-all for the music industry by the end of the debate. Why? Because supposedly all websites were representative of third parties. Third parties whom we mentioned from the beginning of the debate were people who just wanted, like you and me, try out the music, listen to it, and then decide to go to the concert if they liked it. People who were willing to help the music industry, they chose to demonize. In fact, they never stood on their argument of enforcement in terms of logical proof. All they said was, well, just because it is, doesn't mean it should be. But that isn't a logical justification for their side at the present. They never showed us why systemically trends were moving in favor of enforcement of copyright laws, and these were defending the music industry. All they said was, well, perhaps we should try a little harder. It was opposition. It was proposition instead that was willing to deal with these arguments. We recognized the nature of intellectual property rights as means to a greater purpose, and we talked about how we would safeguard an entire industry from being robbed. Those were the arguments we made, again, not adequately responded to. So that's the first question dealt with. Let's now talk about this issue of safeguarding the music industry and its artists. And here, we heard lots of cataclysmic claims from opposition at the beginning about how it was going to obliterate an industry. But then their case immediately reduced itself to just talking about indie groups, which was a concession to the majority of music groups we talked about on our side. But in any case, we dealt with it logically because we talked about how publicity would be generated for such groups if we allowed free distribution, and that generated the income that would be needed. So they decided that wouldn't work, and they went to this phantom point where essentially they came up with a sob story of music artists who can't pursue music if there's no money. The point is, we were the side that recognized the true cause of all the losses that are being suffered by the music industry, which is the continued production of compact discs which don't make sense. All their case amounted to was a lamentation of the present, in contrast to our side, which was willing to stand for good publicity which gains the music industry money, and our second proposition speaker substantive with regard to how we prevent record companies from having a stranglehold over the creative license that artists can possess, and how this helps small bands break into the mainstream in the long term. This was analysis we made from early in the debate. We didn't see an attack. So even on the grounds of indie groups, we took them on the second issue. So that's covered as well. We've shown that music deserves to be heard, and as Shakespeare said, if music be the food of love, play on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a lot of time left before the buses leave. So before I start out this speech, I want to point out that the judges are available for individual feedback. You can find us in the buses, and you can find us over dinner later, okay? So please do come and seek us out, and we'll make sure that we don't forget to bring our notes and give you some extra feedback, if that's okay with you. All right. We also want to thank both teams, and I'd like to give another round of applause for you guys for such a good job. I was personally, and I think I can speak on behalf of the other judges, very happy it was an entertaining debate because, this morning was quite a heavy topic, and stylistically both teams were very engaging with the audience, and we liked the fact that, we've heard about Jesse James, we've heard about Lady Gaga from the other side, we ended with Shakespeare, so, that all made it interesting and light for us, and a joy to listen to. But I have to say that the decision was unanimous, and we based this decision on obviously the style of content and the strategy. Stylistically, we thought there was a slight advantage in one team in presenting their arguments in a way that was engaging with the audience and entertaining to them, and were a bit more responsive to the reactions they got. On content, we felt that even though the debate started out with two valid cases against each other, we feel that one team was able to develop their arguments further and provide new analysis, while the other team came back to their own points without engaging enough with the new points that were raised in the other team. And this also falls into some strategy issues, because you have to choose what kind of points are you going to focus on and how much time are you going to spend on focusing on these points, and which points have become very important in a later stage in the debate. And we felt, because of that development of the debate, and it was a unanimous decision, we congratulate Singapore with their win.